Everybody, welcome back. I'm the Strategy Professor, and today we're going to be doing the support tier list. So as always, if you enjoy the content, please be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out a ton on the channel. Come by, check out the stream. Right now it starts around 11:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Usually goes till about 2:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's a very friendly, chill community. We'd love to have you. And we're doing lots of guides, and I'm going to be doing some fresh champion guides as well. So I've already got a Rakan guide on the season. I'll try to add some more in there over time, and then we've got our best one-trait guide and some other content as well. And I'm going to try to do at least the 80 carry tier list, if not some other tier lists as well in this patch. So be sure to check all that out. Come by the stream, hang out. Remember, it's only on Twitch, Strategy Professor. We'd love to have you. Okay, let's go ahead and get in here. So I don't think a ton has been shaken up on this patch. So I did move Renata down a little bit. I suppose we can get to her in a second just to kind of go in order. Well, you know what? I guess yeah, let's do that, because visually I think when people see it, they're going to expect me to go in order. I was just thinking, well, what if we jump around a little bit? But I think people expect me to go in order. So let's kind of move quickly through some of these other ones that haven't changed as much. So Rakan, I think, is still really good. Perennially underrepresented. His win rate's about the same as always, usually like 49 to 51%. I have gone back towards the Guardian build on him with the Shirelias, and then I typically like to do either the Putrefier or the Zeeks. I'm not really feeling the Redemption a lot of times, especially if you're in, gold, platinum, silver, that type of thing. It just really counts on your teammates actually staying in that in order to get that heal, and also if they have any sort of grievous wounds, it's going to cut into that. And there is still quite a bit of healing out there. More people are getting Blade of the Ruined King, people are going back to Gore Drinker, people are getting Eclipse, so there is still quite a bit of healing out there. Many people are going to be able to cut into that. Yeah, not a lot has changed. I still think that the Glacial Augment can be an okay build. I think the win rate is pretty similar overall. I've had some people ask that. It's actually, that's not true. It's a lot lower now. I'm not sure what's dragging it down, but it is about 2.5% lower than Guardian. The big thing about Guardian is it protects you personally, which is a big deal, because one of the major weaknesses of Rakan is whenever you go in for an engage, if you get CC'd and locked up, you can get blown up really easily because you don't have Aftershock and you don't really have any defensive steroids in your kit. All you have is just your passive shield whenever that's up. So you have a lot of mobility, but if you get caught, then you can get blown up. So Guardian really helps out a lot with that, and it helps against burst damage, like if someone's just coming in and trying to blow up your teammate, like an Ezreal ult coming through, or a Lux laser, Jinx rocket, just something random where you can't CC the person who's throwing stuff at you, then Glacial Augment's not going to do that much. The secondaries are also pretty good. This Font of Life, especially if you're going to go Chemtech Putrefier, is a big deal, because whenever you hit somebody with your ult or your W, it's going to put that debuff on them. And then whenever one of your allies auto-attacks that person, then it's going to give them the grievous wounds, and it's going to keep refreshing that for as long as you can keep the Font of Life buff up. So overall, it works really well with that combination. And then these other ones are okay. They're not amazing, but I'd say they're on par with the Inspiration ones probably. You either get more sustain with Second Wind, you get a little bit of all-in protection with Bone Plating, or you get a little bit more scaling with Conditioning, which is pretty good if you want to go for something like a Zeke's in your build. And then typically I'll either go Unflinching if they have a lot of CC, or just Overgrowth just for a little bit of extra health and survivability in that mid-game. Like I said, as far as items go, there are several options that you can do with Rakan. I still think that Shirelia's is really nice because movement speed is at such a high premium right now, with so many bruisers still running around the meta. Just being able to help your team sort of get on people and engage or kite around in a fight is a very big deal. And then, of course, you're going to love the, ability power, health, all of that. You are going to be squishier with this option than you would be with other options. So, again, you have to be careful. If they have a lot of CC, or they just have a lot of burst damage, then you might want to, consider going either Locket or Even Shroud. But generally, I tend to like the Shirelias. Even Shroud has ticked up a little bit in win rate from where it was, but it's also a super small sample size of only 200 games. But this is a nice, well-rounded item. It does give you that armor. It does give you that magic resist if you're the primary engage and if you're going to get hit by a lot of AoE stuff. So if they have, like a Fiddlesticks ult or a Ziggs bomb and a Moo ult, just stuff where it's going to be very difficult to protect people and not get hit by some kind of splash damage. Even Shroud's pretty good, but it still does give you that little bit of extra damage as well at that 9% whenever you immobilize somebody. And then Locket is okay if they do have a lot of that AoE burst damage and you just want to be able to protect your team. Locket can be decent. You do have to be careful with Locket and Even Shroud to make sure that you're taking good back timings because you will run out of mana pretty quickly without having any mana regen on those. So watch out for that, especially if you're going for a Guardian build and you're not going to have those biscuits like you would have with the Glacial build. You got to watch out for that. But overall, I think those are both good. And then some more niche options out there. I've had people asking about like AP Rakan on stream sometimes. In general, I'm not a big fan of that. It does have a high win rate right now. But the problem is it just costs so much at 3,200. And I just feel like you want to be moving on to your next item more quickly. Like 2,500. Like for 700 gold, you could already be, a third of your way to Chemtech Putrefier just about. That's your second item. So I'm just not a big believer in it. Again, it can be okay, but it doesn't do a lot to help your allies out. You're paying quite a bit for that magic pin, I think, which, a lot of your abilities don't have super high base damage, so the pin's not as valuable. So it's okay. It's okay. I mean, if you do want to go for something like that, I probably would go for Everfrost because at least it only costs 2,800 instead of 2,500. You do get the 600 mana, so that does help out a little bit with your mana situation. But the biggest thing is it gives you that extra 1.5 second root. So you can, chain that together with your R plus W and root them afterwards and, get like 3 seconds of CC. So it is pretty good. And I have tried that in the past, but you are a little bit squishier if you go for that. But I do, it's okay. Like, it's pretty good. It has a good win rate there. It's low sample size, but it's good. If your team does need a bit more AP, Rakan does have pretty good scaling with it. So it's nice. It's just you are going to be, I guess you are not quite as squishy, but you don't have the movement speed to go with it. So it's okay. Like its stats are definitely better than Shrelia's, getting the extra 40 AP, basically the same ability haste, just a little bit less, getting way more mana, getting a little bit more health. So on paper, it definitely does look like a much better bargain. But in practice, that movement speed is just so big with certain comps. But if you do want that lockdown, maybe I'll try Everfrost again. I mean, it is a good value proposition. And then, like I said, as far as secondaries, I think Putrefier is the most popular one just because there is a lot of healing out there. This is one of the best Grievous Wound effects in the game. It's only 2,300 gold, and you get to 60% super easily on everybody with Font of Life. So that is very nice. I do think that Zeke's is a little underrated. This does give you that extra little bit of tankiness if you need it, and then it does give some extra on-hit damage either for your AD carry or someone else who does a lot of ability hits, like a Cassiopeia, Rise, Azir, that type of stuff. Convergence does work with spell hits as well, so there's a lot of good options there. And then Knight's Vow is okay as a second or third item if they just really have a fed assassin and you're trying to protect someone on your team that's a really high value target. I think it can be pretty good. I have also tried Zonya's. I don't know if I would get this outside of the Glacial Augment build. If you already have the stopwatch from Glacial Augment, then it's a pretty good value proposition. It's only $23.50. It takes off 250 gold. So this is pretty good, especially if they have a lot of binds. So stuff where you can still activate Zonya's, but will get you out of a lot of trouble. So most notably Lux and Morgana. If they bind you, you can still activate Hourglass, and then they probably won't be able to blow you up in the meantime. So it does have some good uses there, obviously against things like Zed, things like Yone, these kind of delayed dots that people can put on you can be pretty good. Karthus ult. So it definitely has situations where it can be pretty nice. It's a pretty decent value proposition. If they have a lot of AD especially, and you're going to get a lot of value out of that armor, it's okay. So I think it is very situational, but it's okay, and it certainly starts getting a little bit better once you get the Glacial Augment. So yeah, lots of different options on Rakan. He's good engage, he has reasonable scaling, very good, fairly unique utility. He's one of the only people that take Shirelias in this meta, so overall solid champ if you want some scaling, but you also want to have an engaged champ. I think he's great. And then I think Janna is still really good. Very underrated. A lot of people kind of got off the Janna train. She was super popular for a while. Her win rate hasn't really changed. I think they fixed a bug on her. But she's still incredibly powerful. Glacial works super well with her. And And the reason that this works, if anybody's wondered why she all of a sudden start doing this, because people were trying this at the start of the season and it wasn't that good, but now it's great. The main thing is that they gave an extra free 20% plus healing and shielding off of Eye of the Storm, which with Glacial Augment you get 9% extra slow per 10%. So basically you're starting off baseline with a 48% AoE slow, on this champion, which is really good. And then just off of Moonstone, once that gets charged up, it's like 90% slow. So she just scales insanely hard off of just Moonstone, particularly against melee dive comps. And that's what a lot of champions are out there. Some of the strongest champs in the meta right now are these kind of dive melee champions. So she is kind of weak to long range champs. So, be aware of that. She's not going to have a lot of answers to Jinx. So if you want to play Janna, I highly recommend you ban Jinx. And then stuff like Caitlyn, Senna, even Jen with rapid fire cannon, stuff like that can be, difficult for her to deal with. But if you have the higher scaling ADC, if you have the Jinx, if you have the Kog'Maw, or just whatever champion you're trying to protect, she's very good at protecting people, especially melees, from getting on your team. So pretty good scaling, especially with Moonstone. Glacial Augment just adds another tool to her kit and just kind of makes her the master of slows and peel. So really nice high scaling champion. Font of Life works really well with a lot of things in her kit with Moonstone. If you do want to get Ardent Sensor, it helps out a lot with that. Of course, you want to get Revitalize anytime you're going Moonstone on a champion. The free boots are nice because you already have that extra movement speed off of your W early on. So she's very good at rotating as well. So if you have a split push team, she's really good at sort of running from lane to lane to kind of deal with situations, because she does have that movement speed and she can peel for herself really well. So if you get caught out in the river trying to rotate up to top lane or something like that to help your split pusher out, you're probably going to be able to get out of that situation because you're fast, you have the Q to peel people, you have the Glacial Augment, and you have your ultimate as kind of a last resort. So she's very hard to get a hold of. She's very slippery, again, especially for melee champions. And so that gives her a lot better vision control and a lot better rotations than things like Soraka or Sona that are going to be much, much more vulnerable if they're trying to place deep wards or if they're trying to rotate between lanes. So, anyways, I think that she's pretty unique in the meta and pretty good as long as you have the higher scaling team. And particularly if you have AD champions, because don't forget, she does give 50 extra AD, typically sometimes more, off of her shield. So if you just throw that on a crit champion like a Jen or Jinx or even something like a Zed or a Talon, they will really do a lot of extra damage. Now, you're not going to get credit for that most of the time, but it does offer a lot of damage. And that's why she scales more than some of the other enchanters out there, is because that extra AD just adds up a lot once people start getting more attack speed, more critical strike. That AD starts to become increasingly valuable. So, very good champion. Classically extremely good at solo queue. She's still good at solo queue. Again, you just have to make sure you have the range advantage, you have the scaling advantage, and then she's going to be great. Okay, and then the next two are pretty common. They've been there pretty much all season, and this is just a numbers game. Moonstone is just way too strong right now, and it doesn't look like they have any plans to nerf it. It just scales ridiculously hard. And pretty much when you play something like Soraka or Sona, especially if you're at your natural elo bracket, so if you're kind of near your peak, I would say, and you just kind of want to fit in with the rest of your team, if you don't think you're going to be able to significantly outplay other people in your elo bracket, so if you're not smurfing, if you're just playing and you think you're about as strong as other people and you just want to scale, you just want to play the numbers game and just kind of basically say, hey, you know what? As long as we don't get run over by 20 or 25 minutes, we're just going to win every team fight by default. If you just want to play something that's very, defensive and, performs extremely well off of 2 or 3 items, then Soraka or Sona are going to be your picks. So I think it's great. Now, if you are coming from a higher elo bracket, if you're smurfing, or, if you perform really well on engaged champions, it can kind of feel bad with the Soraka and the Sona, because you just really can't make plays on those champions. It's very difficult. It's like, yes, you can flash ult as Sona, right? Or with Soraka, you could maybe do something with your Q or your silence, but for the most part, those are just strictly high scaling champs that are just going to be watching most of the game, right? Like, you can kind of shot call, you can tell people where to go and like what to do, but it's hard to make the play, like to land the hook or whatever to start a fight. And sometimes it can be rough if your teammates don't do that. But these champs usually have much higher win rates at lower elo brackets just because most people don't make great engages, right? Like, they'll take a fight, most people who, will play Nautilus and Leona and things like that at silver, they'll try to start fights without proper vision or without counting, without noticing that their 80 carry is like farming a side lane, on the other side of the universe, that their top laner doesn't have TP to join the fight. So that's why I think the engaged champs don't tend to perform as well, contrary to like what people might think in, gold, silver, those types of elo brackets, as the Soraka and the Sona. Because they're guaranteed, their power is virtually guaranteed. They don't have to land any hooks. They don't have to make a lot of decisions on that front. They just stay back, don't die, and heal people, and they're just going to win 5v5 ARAM type of fights, which is a lot of what happens. So that's really their strength. So it's just Moonstone. I like Guardian on her just because it does give you that personal protection. You can do Airy if you want more pressure early, but again, you don't really have to pressure early if you don't want to. And your Qs are not guaranteed. You have to actually hit them in the laning phase. So that can be tricky in some matchups if you're afraid you might get engaged on. But yeah, just Guardian, Font, and then whichever one of these is most appropriate. Usually it's going to be either Bone Plating or Second Wind. Then Revitalize, of course. Anytime you have Moonstone, you got to have Revitalize. Then after that, it's up to you. I would probably go Ghost Poro, Ulti Hunter second, because your ultimate is really powerful. And this is one of the few ways that you can really influence the map, is that ult. If you're constantly watching the mini-map, looking at the health bars of your teammates, and, making good decisions, then that ult can definitely influence side lanes tremendously. And that means you can stack up your Ulti Hunter really well because you can get assists from anywhere on the map. Whereas sometimes you have Ulti Hunter, if the enemy top laner just stays top all game, you may not ever get an assist on him to get that extra stack. So anyways, I really like Ulti Hunter, and then Ghost Poro is good just for getting that extra little bit of vision early on, and it's really easy to get to those 10 stacks and get those 30 extra AP. So I like that. And then like Zombie Ward is okay, but it can be very spooky to try to go clear wards by yourself as Soraka, especially if the enemy has a lot of engage, a lot of mobility, and so it's hard for her to clear wards as well as some other champions like Rakan, like Janna, who can more freely, walk around and probably get out of dangerous situations. So anyways, that's what I recommend on her. Now, you can go the Putrefier. I would probably go Redemption on her, and I know I said I don't like it on Rakan, but if you already have Moonstone, and just that 20% healing by itself on Soraka, where she has so much baseline healing, that's almost worth it in and of itself. And this kind of doubles down on your ability to have that semi-global influence where you can throw the Redemption into a side lane and ultimate and just ping it a lot. And then your ultimate buys time for the Redemption to land so that you get that full effectiveness. Now, they are probably going to be getting grievous wounds against you, so, be aware of that. Now, if you time it absolutely perfectly, you can start the Redemption, and then right before it's about to land, you can cast your ultimate as well. That will clear the grievous wounds, and then the Redemption will hit. But either way, I think that she is going to be pretty strong. I think Shirelia's probably still has a good win rate. Yeah, it's actually a little bit higher than Moonstone, but I would still go Moonstone. I guess, like, if you're doing a skirmish style, if you're having to, deal with split pushers or just run around and YOLO Q and your team is just not going to group up for 5v5, maybe Shirelia's is better in that environment. And to be fair, that does happen a lot. But Moonstone is just so incredibly powerful. Like, 35% extra healing and shielding on a Soraka is just, like, insane. So I would probably stick with Moonstone, but she's going to be strong. Oh, I did go a little bit out of order, I guess. We'll talk about Sona here. I think they're very similar in profile, right? Like, Sona is another one where if you don't stop her, she's going to take over team fights later. The main difference between Sona and Soraka in my mind is I probably would go Airy on Sona just because your Q is guaranteed in lane. You can't really miss. You can put up a lot of poke early on. I would probably get Scorch. It depends on the matchup. but just spamming, Q with Airy plus Scorch with either a Caitlyn or a Jinx or just something else long range can actually do quite a lot of poke early game. So she can be a bit more aggressive, a bit more guaranteed aggression, I should say, than a Soraka in the early game. You do have that ultimate, which, can completely turn team fights around with the CC. You don't have the global presence that Soraka has with the ultimate, so you got to be careful with that. But you are also a little bit more well-rounded. You're not all in on the heals, because your W still puts out a good amount of its effectiveness as a shield rather than a heal. And of course your ultimate doesn't heal or shield, it just does a lot of CC. So you're a little bit more diversified as Sona, and you're not impacted as much as Soraka is by grievous wounds. You do also have a bit more mobility than Soraka does. You can personally rotate to fights. You can help your allies rotate and get to fights. That's like a little mini Shirelia's with the Song of Celerity, so you have a bit more utility in that sense than Soraka does. And you do take things like Baron quite a bit faster with the Q spam. It does add up when you're taking Barons or Dragons, or just in longer team fights. So typically most people are going Moonstone, because again, it's super strong. And then a lot of people are going Archangel's Staff, just because you do stack it super fast just by spamming your auras. And she gets a lot of value out of the extra mana, just because you can spam your ability so fast with your ultimate giving you that free CDR. So I think that's what a lot of people are doing. I don't think it's necessarily like horrible to go for something like Staff of Flowing Water, or maybe even Redemption second item. They all have a very similar win rate, or Ardent Censer. It's just people like Archangels. It has more of that personal carry power type of thing to it. It's kind of unique to Sona. Tier feels good early. It does fix a lot of her mana problems in the early game. So that's why people typically go for that. But yeah, again, super high scaling champion that's great if you're going to have clean 5v5 fights, if you're going to have enough time to get 2 items, and if you're not going to get flanked and spanked all the time, then she can be good. But if you're playing weak side, if the jungler's going to dive you every single time that they have a chance, then it's going to be a tough life for you. So you just kind of read the situation, and you're going to be playing Survivor most of the game. Okay, and then taking a step down a little bit, I have Lulu. Now that might seem a little curious, just because a lot of people consider Lulu to be one of the strongest enchanters, and I think she's the most banned enchanter, depending on how you classify Glass. Actually, she's not. That has changed. No, wait. Wrong button there. No, Yuumi is most banned. Okay, and then Lulu. So what is it about Lulu that makes her strong, but why is she a little bit down from the other people? I think the big thing is she's very good at buffing up a single target, but she's not as good at helping an entire team in a team fight, and she doesn't scale as well with Moonstone. So she's really good if you have a hyper-scaling champion like a Jinx, like a Twitch, Cogmaw, something else that wants to attack a lot, because her W is going to give you movement speed and really fast attack speed, and her passive, which I don't think it spells out here, basically gives you extra damage on attack, and around level 9 or so, it's 80 extra damage. So the more attack speed that somebody has, the more value they're going to get out of your picks. So that's a really, really valuable amount of extra damage. It's like thousands and thousands of gold worth of on-hit damage, effectively. It doesn't work with Gensu's, but it's very similar most of the time. So she basically gives people a ton of extra damage, extra movement speed. You can also use that W to polymorph somebody, so she's going to be a lot better against melee, squishy melee champions that want to dive you. Like your Rivens, your Irelias, things like that. Those champs aren't necessarily always squishy. But just things that are going to get punished really hard when they go in and get CC'd for 2 seconds. So she does have that ability, and then of course your R is really strong. Just point click, just instant infusion of health. It gets around grievous wounds. It's there's no cast time on it, no projectile. It knocks people up, which can buy that extra little bit of time to help somebody kite. Obviously works with things like Yasuo, Samira, stuff of that nature. Now it doesn't scale with plus healing and shielding because it's an infusion of health, but like I said, it's also not affected by grievous wounds. So sort of a double-edged sword, and it doesn't have very much AP scaling either. It's only got a 0.5. So that's why a lot of people think that she doesn't scale in 5v5 team fights at the same magnitude of Soraka or Sona, who are going to have much faster abilities they can cast, and they're going to have some kind of area of effect stuff they can do, whereas she doesn't. Another thing is that she's very close range compared to something like a Janna, because her W, I think, is only 650 range. I don't think it's saying it here, but it's very close range. It's like 650, and so is your E. Now, the E is nice in the laning phase because it does pretty respectable damage. It's a point click, starts at 80, scales to 240 damage. So that's nice, but it's still relatively short range. So it can be a little spooky to walk up and try to do that to something like a Leona in the laning phase. You also have the problem of potentially misclicking with W and E. Lulu is fairly unique that both of those abilities can target either allies or enemies. So if you have people all piled right on top of each other, or minions piled on top of, somebody, then it's very easy to misclick, right? To try to shield your ally, but you accidentally shield a minion because they're like right in the middle of 5 minions, or the Zed is jumping on top of them and you try to shield your ally, but you accidentally damage the Zed, or even, worse, where you try to polymorph, somebody in a fight, but you accidentally, give your ally the buff or something like that. It's weird things like that can happen, and sometimes it's mechanical, sometimes it's just the game, right? When there are things overlapping with each other, the hitboxes are just like weird sometimes, and you guys see that even with hook champions, right? Sometimes the best place to aim for a hook on Thresh is like, someone's right foot rather than their actual frame. So it just gets kind of weird with hitboxes and how they overlap. So that is a risk that she runs of misclicks, either being kind of player error or just squirrely code in the game. It's a problem with Lulu in the sense that it's not with a lot of other enchanters. So just be aware that if you play Lulu a lot, that will come up more times than you would like, probably. So you really got to be careful how you're dealing with that. If you're trying to target allies, you can fix that a little bit by aiming for their portrait that's right over the minimap. That does require you to move your mouse away from the main action, which is bad. That's why most people don't click their abilities. They use hotkeys, because moving your mouse away is usually not a good thing to do. But that is an option if it's a desperate situation. But you really don't have anything to help you out with enemies. You just kind of have to be able to click on them most of the time. But anyways, Lulu, very good. Excellent buff. Excellent single target protector and buffer. Just can fall behind in 5s. Then we have Renata, and she's getting a lot more attention. I did have her number 1 overall last patch, and I think that she still is good, but I did drop her down a little bit because she has been nerfed multiple times. And just after playing with her several times, it was all right, playing with her, but there were a few things that I noticed. The W is nice, but it's not very good against all-in burst. If they initiate the fight. So if it's like you're already really deep in a fight and you're able to peel people back and then use that W after like both sides have had some attrition, when people on both sides are getting low, it's good. But like if the Zed just comes in and just like unloads on your AD carry, it's not really going to do anything because they're just going to die, resurrect, and not get the assist. But in the team fight, if someone's trying to int to like dive your backline and sacrifice themselves to kill your Jinx, and you bring the Jinx back and she gets an assist, that's good. Sometimes it can get a little weird too if your AD carry or whomever like kills the person right before they die, and then they die, then they don't get the assist to come back to life. So learning how to play around that can be weird. It can actually be the correct play if both people are like at 1% health and someone has a bailout on them. Let the other person kill you first and then kill that person. Right, but that requires your ally to really understand what's going on. And I think a lot of people don't really know what's happening with Renata still a lot of the time. So it's a very good ability, but it's definitely not the same kind of just like point-click protection as something like a Zillion ult or even a Tahm Kench ult. It is a little bit more conditional on it being a close fight to be a worthwhile ability. Now, you do still get the movement speed a little bit and a little bit of the attack speed, so that is cool. But it is a very long cooldown. I think they increased it by 4 seconds. Might have only been 2 seconds. But yeah, 24 seconds either way is a long time. The Q is okay. It is a pretty short range. It is a lot shorter than other hooks. I think it's only 900 range. So you can definitely get, some okay hits on that. It's usually a little bit better to use it as a peel rather than an engage, although if you see opportunities, you can definitely engage with it. So it's okay. The displacement is good against hook champions like a Thresh or a Leona or whatever. If you can hit the Q when they hit a hook on somebody and then like push them out of the way, then that can be good. Obviously, that's not going to work with Blitz Hook, but anything that's like trying to come into your ally, she's good at peeling. And then your E is okay. Like it puts out a pretty good shield. The radius is kind of small, so you can hit 1 or 2 people with this. That's nice, but it is kind of a longer cooldown as well. Your R is very good. It's a long cooldown, but it is really nice to peel with. It is kind of hard to hit this offensively on people because it has a really long windup. I don't know if it says it right there. But it's like a 0.75 second windup. So it's like even longer than a Nami windup on her wave. And Nami's wave, I think, even moves a little bit faster. So again, this is nice. If they are jumping into you and you're peeling them, then I think it's good. But if you're trying to do that to start a fight, like you would with like maybe a Seraphine or a Sona or something like that, I think you're going to be a little disappointed with it. So it's okay. It's good. So my verdict is I think that she's much closer to something like a peeler utility enchanter than she is an engaged champ. And that's why I brought her down a little bit, because I think engage is at a very high premium right now. I don't know. I mean, I say that, and then I have like Leona and Nautilus down. I do have Rakan up. But like she doesn't have the same level of scaling, I don't think, as like raw healing power as something like a Sona or a Soraka. She does have more utility, almost like an Enchanter Thresh sort of champ. I mean, obviously they have very different abilities, but she's just really more of a disruptor. Like, the W obviously scales really well based on your allies' like damage they can put out. The more items they have, the more likely they are to get a kill and to get an assist and to come back to life. Then your E has pretty good numbers on it. Obviously your R scales with how much damage they do to hit each other. So I don't know. She's kind of an odd duck. And that I don't think that she scales quite as hard as the ladies, right? As the, Janna, Sona, Soraka, even Lulu. She is harder to get value out of her because, like I said, a lot of her stuff is not guaranteed. You have to use it correctly in the right situation, and most of the time your teammates have to understand what's going on and play around it correctly. So I think there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong. But if she is played right, especially in like, maybe a higher elo environment, then I think she can be pretty strong. So I don't know. I could definitely see an argument for her still being S-class. But just in my experience, I think I would probably rather just play something like a Janna if you just want like a really high scaling peeler type of champion. But it's hard to compare her to most other things just because she is so different from a lot of other champs. I think Guardian probably is the correct call. You do want to be playing defensive, peeling. Font of Life is good because Putrefire is a great second item on her, kind of like Rakan, because she has so many pieces of CC. And then I would probably go the Ghost Poro Ulti Hunter. I think that ult is just really, really big for team fights. It can completely turn team fights around. It's very good against these melee dive type of champions. And then after that, it's up to you. Just your standard enchanter stuff with Ardent Censer, Staff of Flowing Water, wherever you want to go. I think that's typically the best. Some people have suggested, what if you go like tank Renata? I don't think that's that great because her base stats aren't that good. She does heal herself with her E. But as you can see, like the Even Shroud is kind of low. Now Locket is doing fairly well right now, so that's a thing. I mean, she doesn't have a ton of mana problems. A lot of people are going Mandate on her, just because, again, you have so much CC and it just kind of works with her kit. But I don't know. I mean, maybe Locket is the way to go. But anyways, so I think she's pretty good. She's pretty good overall. Lux is one that I've really liked a lot. I know it sounds like a super low elo special, and in some ways I guess it kind of is. But I do like Lux in this meta if you want to go for a high pressure lane. Her win rate has dipped. She was like at 52 or 53. So I'm not entirely sure like what's up with that. But there are a few things that I do like about Lux. Number one, she's really long range. So pairing her with a Jinx, with a Caitlyn, Jhin, that type of champ is good. Because you can basically just spam E's in the laning phase. And I really like Comet a lot more than First Strike, just because I think one of her major strengths is pressuring in the early game. It looks like the win rate is going to be better with First Strike, although it's a much, much bigger sample size on Comet. But the slow on your E basically guarantees the Comet's going to hit anytime you land it. And then that's also going to allow you to go for Scorch, which is going to be even more poke. And then I would probably get Ulti Hunter plus Cheap Shot. And Cheap Shot is nice too because, again, you slow them with the E, and then when you activate it, then it's going to trigger the Cheap Shot. So basically, every time you hit them with an E, you're also hitting them with Comet, Scorch, and Cheap Shot. So that's a lot of extra poke damage in the early game with her. So I really like that. Mana Flow Band does help you out with your mana early on. You do, of course, have a bind. If you land your bind, somebody's probably dying. It's very similar to a hook in my mind. It's pretty good engage. Now, it's fairly slow. People can see it coming, but if you can control the bushes, just like a lot of the hooks, and you hit people out of it, it's nice. And typically in the mid-game against squishies, you can kill them by yourself a lot of times. Once you get kind of the Ludens plus your Sork Boots, you hit somebody with a bind, E, R, they're probably dead. Or you certainly take them super low, and a teammate can probably kill them. So I really like that about her. So in that sense, yes, she's very similar to something like a Zyra, where you can poke and pressure and things of that nature. But a few things that I like about her that are a bit different. Number one, the E, like the range on this is really far. It doesn't say what it is on here, but it's like 1300 range or something. It's very far. And it gives you vision for that full 5 seconds of an area. So you can put this in a bush, check out the entire bush, you can clear a control ward there, or you can just put it like on a ramp or something of that nature. And that's going to stop, or just put it near like a tower. Just make it really awkward for the enemy to try to last hit or to try to defend a tower. Because if they walk over that, they're going to be slowed by a ton, and that almost guarantees you're going to hit your Q if you don't have a dash. And you can just reactivate it to do damage to them. So that slow field is a big deal. It can also help you get away from hot situations. So if a jungler's coming in, you just throw that E, kind of blocking their path, and it's going to make it really hard for them to walk through it for similar reasons. If they try to walk through it, you just hit them with a Q. So she is a bit harder to gank. She's a bit harder to surprise than most other AP type of champions. So I just really like the utility of that. The fact that she does have the high damage. The ult is on a very low cooldown, so you can consistently try to make plays on it. It has a really long range. It can wave clear really well. So when you're playing in like silver or gold or probably even low platinum, sometimes the carries just don't catch those waves as much as they should. And you can just try to, make that push before you go rotate and do something. You can also get cheeky and snipe out blues or reds or whatever if you have good vision of the enemy jungle. A lot of times people won't suspect it. They won't have the reaction time like they will at higher elos and use their smite. So you can just kind of catch them off guard with that, which can be pretty good. So overall, I like her. If you're going to be able to put a lot of pressure down early, put them under tower and just fish for Qs and Es, I think that she can be very strong, especially with something like a Jhin. Again, because if you hit them with the E, they're going to be slow, they're going to take damage. Jhin hits his W, then you hit your Q, and then you both just ult them and they're dead most of the time. So it's just a lot of nasty combos. And technically, if Caitlyn has hands, which half of them do, if you ever land your bind, she should be able to trap them and then they're dead. So she just combos really well with a lot of meta champions out there. Same thing with Jinx. You bind them, Jinx puts the traps on them, they're probably dead. So I like her early on. She's kind of my pressure champion of choice. I like her better than Karma if that's what you're going for in the laning phase. I know some people really do like Karma as well, and Karma does have that mantra R early on, does a ton of damage, but I just feel like it's just not as consistent as Lux, and you just don't have that one-shot potential late game as much as Lux does. Now, Karma does have the movement speed to help out your allies later, but I just feel like in YOLO queue, I'd probably just rather play Lux. As kind of, bronze as that sounds, I've found her to be very effective recently. Okay, and then we've got Nautilus. Now, he's being played a lot in pro, and I think he is, very strong. The main thing with Nautilus is just, the guaranteed engage off of the R. That's the biggest thing, is, it's so hard to get away from that. Unless they have Hourglass or some kind of spell shield or something like that, the R is going to hit them. Doesn't matter if they flash, they dash, they take a Thresh Lantern, whatever, that R is going to hit them. And unless they get, behind a wall or a tower or something like that, you're going to hit them with the hook. So the R plus the hook threat is just so massive. And that's really, that's the story of Nautilus. It's just guaranteed tons of CC in team fights. pretty decent damage with his E. Now, a lot of people are maxing the Q, and the big reason I think for that is, number one, they buff the damage a decent chunk, but also it's only 60 mana at all ranks. That frees you up to not have to take a mana item, so you can go for something like a Locket first without running into mana issues, and Knight's Vow second if you want to, or you can still go for a Zeke's. But it's just running around trying to get as many R's off as you can and just deleting people. Now, the fact that his R is very fast, or not his R, his Q is very fast, it doesn't have any wind-up time, so you just like throw it straight at him, is really nice. It's very easy to hit open field, but it also disrupts enemy engage if you do it properly. So one of the reasons why a lot of people in Pro like the Nautilus into Leona matchup is whenever Leona tries to hit her E on somebody, while she's mid-transit, if you hit him with the hook while she's going, it will knock her out of that. So it displaces her so that she never gets on your person. Or if like Thresh hooks somebody and she's trying to go in, you can hook Thresh out of that. Or like if a Zac is trying to fly in, you can hook him, it'll knock him out of that. Because it's a displacement. So I think that's really nice. It is similar to like Thresh's Flay, but I think it's even easier to hit just because you don't have to have perfect timing. It just goes all the way through until it hits somebody. So I think that has a lot of utility, and it just gives him better peel than something like a Leona in those types of situations. So, and you can escape with it somewhat. So if it gets scary, if you're hooking people or you're getting into a weird situation, you can hook walls and actually get out of some stuff. Especially if you time that properly. Like if someone is about to CC you and then you throw your hook and they like hook you and then your hook hits the tower or something like that, you will still pull your way out of it. So you can get these really weird timings with some champions where you're still able to escape stuff you probably shouldn't be able to escape based on how you time that hook. So there can be a pretty large amount of skill to Nautilus, like played at a super high level. Obviously the press R is not like super skill expressive, but just how you use that Q can actually be pretty good. And like I said, it's just standard stuff. Just lock it, then either Zeke's or Knight's Vow. Then you almost always want to go Aftershock. Again, secondaries. I'm a huge fan of Ulti Hunter on anyone that has a very high impact ult, and Nautilus definitely does, so I would probably just go Ghost Poro Ulti Hunter on Nautilus. His AP ratios are actually pretty decent as well. He has a 0.9 on his Q, and his E is a 0.5 per wave, or a 0.3 I should say per wave, and I think the R is like a 0.8 on the main target, so it's pretty good. So the extra 30 AP that you get off of Ghost Poro is definitely relevant. But anyways, that's it for Nautilus. I think he's one of the better engaged champs. Leona, she's still good. The major thing with Leona is her uptime on single target for CC is unmatched by hardly anybody because she has such low cooldowns. Her Q, I believe, starts at 6 seconds. It might be 5 seconds, and you can get her E all the way down to 6 seconds as well. Her ultimate's 90 seconds. So she's the quintessential just run around constantly making plays and just chain CC people over and over again. And she has a lot of tankiness in the early game because of how her W is flat damage reduction and not just percentage reduction anymore. Not just armor magic resist, but just straight up flat reduction. Makes it very good against things like minion hits early, auto attacks, just all this stuff like Airy, Scorch, Comet, all these little small chip damage things are going to be heavily reduced by that flat damage reduction. So she's really solid, and she can engage through the minion wave, which I think is very nice. Like Nautilus and Thresh, they have to kind of jockey for position around the wave to threaten to land hooks, where she can just stand near the front and just sort of anywhere, anytime, go in. So that makes her a great candidate with other ADCs who can do a similar type of thing, most notably like a Tristana, who can jump right over that wave and just threaten anyone anytime. So I think that she's pretty good. Same thing with Jhin. He can hit that W through the minion wave. So she has a lot of good partners. Now the main thing with Leona is she has one direction she goes, and that's in, right? So whenever you go in, you're not getting back out. So it's very easy to bait her. So if you're going to be playing on weak side, if you expect the jungler just to come down and camp you all game, that could be a huge problem. And she kind of feels bad if she's behind because, again, you just don't have that much you can do other than go in and chain CC somebody, which is strong. But, again, if you're getting baited, if you don't have proper vision, if your team can't really follow up or they're just going to run around you and just dive the back line, then she can get into trouble. But she's still going to be a really good pick if you can play her well. Now, Senna's another one that is still pretty strong. I think they nerfed her, mostly the AD version of Senna. But she is a pretty good carry right now if you do want to play her. It looks like people are going with Airy, which I think is a little weird. I forgot what people were doing with her, but it wasn't Airy. And I could have sworn that... Okay, I guess people are on that Eclipse train. I thought more people had been on the Divine Sunder. They have a similar win rate, but I guess Eclipse is a little bit better. It's going to do more damage. It does give you that extra movement speed. It does have the Omni Vamp on it, which is really good. And then a lot of people are, going back to kind of the rapid fire cannon build. I think more people were going for the Ginsu build, and I can't remember if this was just like super popular with Muramana or if it was popular because of Divine Sunder. I think you would go with that with Kraken Slayer. She has several different items that you can get. She scales really, really well, especially if you can get a lot of souls early on. Then you can do a ton of damage later on in the game. And she has, like, nice utility, too, right? Like, your Q has good poke, but also heals you for a decent amount. Your W is going to give you that, or your E, rather, is going to give you that movement speed. It's going to make it hard for people to do point-click stuff on you. So, like, Nautilus, pretty good against Nautilus. If he's trying to R somebody, then you can just cloak him, and he's not going to be able to R him as easily unless he hits his hook first. So that can actually be a really nice interaction for her. And then, of course, your W is a pretty good delayed root, which gives your Gen time to kind of wake up and land the W or the Jinx Chompers or whatever the case may be. So I think she's good. And then you also have that global, damage / shield that can, completely turn fights around. So I think she has a nice kit. She is squishy. She can get flanked. She does have that little bit of slow now on her Q, and then she does get that movement speed off of Eclipse. So she can kite her way out of, some melee champions, but some of the really hard engaged champions can still light her up. So you got to be careful. But with other poke lanes, with a Caitlyn, with a Jinx, a lot of the other popular champs, then she can be super strong right now. Blitzcrank, really hit or miss as usual. If you land your hook, you can completely take over the game. You just get those Moby boots, run around, just hook people, constantly make plays. But if they have mobility or spell shields, or if they just position around the wave really well, or if they have a lot of tanks on their team late game, then that hook does lose a lot of value. So it just depends on how good that hook is going to be against the enemy team. And at lower elo brackets, I think that he's a lot stronger because people just don't ever dodge the hooks, and they just put themselves in position to where they could get hooked, whereas smarter players are just gonna give up certain some minions in order to have a safer laning phase when playing against Blitz. But overall, good if you play him. If you play him well, if you land those hooks. But that's where it all comes down to. He's super one-dimensional, but it's a good dimension to be in if you can play it right. And then Rell. Now, I have not seen Rell hardly at all, but her win rate is kind of creeping back up. And I'll be honest, recently, I have not played her. I have not played against her, so I'm not sure everything that's kind of changed about her in the meta. And it looks like a lot of other people also are not playing her. She has less than a 2% play rate. But it looks like people are trying out the Glacial Augment. She does break shields with her Qs. That is really nice against shielding champs. I know that she's really good against Rakan or any champ that has to go in and get close to her, because she can just activate her. I think it's her E that kind of stuns anyone near her. So it's very, very good against Rakan because he has to go in with his W. Then you can interrupt him before he starts that upward motion if you just stun him. And then he's just kind of stuck there, especially if you ult. It's going to make it really hard for him to get out. So, yeah, she's really, really obnoxious against Rakan. So I'm not super sad if she's not in the meta. But as far as other champs, I think she's okay. But there probably are more reliable engaged champs, but I put her up there just out of respect because she does have a high win rate, and she can start some fights, but I think it's a bit harder for her to start a fight against some of these backline champs like a Jinx, Sona, Leona, because her range is going to be a bit shorter. She doesn't have a hook. She has to usually transform on her W and then just kind of run at people and try to flip them back, and usually she needs her flash to make that work. So she's okay. She's just a little bit more of almost a peeler type of tank. Maybe not as much as like a Taric, but I don't know. She's okay. And then we're almost out of time, so I want to make sure we get through this last couple here. Yumi is still really good if you put her with the right champions, and if you are very confident that your team's going to be able to carry, basically. So she's great with like a Zeri or a Jinx, or Twitch is fantastic because then you can both go invisible if you're attached to Twitch. She's great on things like Evelynn. A lot of things that have either invisibility or really high mobility, she's going to be good. And she does scale super well, but the major problem with Yumi is that she has like the worst vision control in the game because she doesn't take boots most of the time. If you get CC'd, you can't reattach to anybody, so that's a big problem. Her Q is pretty good. You know, if you landed a lot in the laning phase, it's basically guaranteed airy procs. If they don't have a lot of engage, you can just auto attack and basically get infinite mana in the laning phase too. So against things like Sona or Soraka, she can kind of hang with them early. Now, kind of like Lulu, she can't really buff up all of her teammates a ton. She does have the ultimate, which is really nice if you land it. But if it's just clean 5v5 team fights and both teams are about even, I think she's probably going to get outscaled by the Sona and the Soraka. However, if you have like a 7-0 Jinx or whatever, then she's going to be a lot better in that situation at helping the Jinx snowball than would something like a Sona or a Soraka. So she's basically like the best helper in the game, the best force multiplier, amplifier in the game, but also one of the riskiest, potentially. She's risky in the sense that you don't have the vision, and if you get caught, you're dead. But at the same time, late game, if you're on someone with that mobility or that tankiness, then she's super safe because you can't actually attack her. You have to kill the person she's attached to first. So she's a very odd, unique type of champion. And it's very, very risky. That's why she's banned a lot, because if someone on the enemy team does get fed and you have that Yumi, it's just super, super hard to deal with it. So super risky champion, but if you're duoed with somebody that you know can carry, or you do your scouting, on Porofessor, op.gg, or wherever you like to look at your pregame, stats, if your teammates, if you trust them on carries, then Yumi can be pretty good. Like I said, best case scenarios are typically hyperscalers, most notably Twitch because of the invisibility, but she's good with a lot of things. But really, she's more of a team comp call and a trust call, more so than any specific, matchups. Okay, Thresh, still going to be pretty good. He has been nerfed over time, but he is still getting played a lot in pro. He takes the most skill to play super well. Just because he's a blend of, you have to make the right decisions on him, so there are a lot of different ways you can use his abilities. You can use the Lantern offensively to pull in a jungler, or defensively to save an ally. So you have to decide, how are you going to position? Are you positioning in a forward way, so you can use that Lantern aggressively? Or do you want to position back just in case you get ganked or you need to help somebody peel? So it really affects not only where you throw the Lantern, but how you're positioning yourself and how you're thinking of the geometry of the fight in terms of what you think is going to go down and what your role is. Because unlike a lot of champs, Thresh can serve a bunch of different roles, right? He can be an engage, an aggressor, a disruptor, or he can be a peeler, depending on what your team needs. So super, multifarious, very versatile. Similarly with the hook, right? You can take the hook if you want to, if you land it, or you can just land it and just get, 1.5 seconds of CC and just let your team, get a little bit of poke damage in there. So you really kind of have to read the situation. Is this a good fight to go into? Are you tanky enough not to get blown up? You have those options with Thresh. And then, of course, you have your E as well, which can be really tricky in terms of the geography and how you're timing it. But being able to displace somebody who's coming in is a really good peeling tool, as is your R. So, really strong potential on the champion, but very unforgiving if you screw stuff up. He does not have a lot of guaranteed power. His numbers are fairly low outside of the laning phase. He's not going to do a ton of damage. He's not going to have a lot of healing and shielding. And his items are okay, but they're not as phenomenal as other champs. So, he's good if you really play him well. But Nautilus is going to give you a lot more guaranteed power with his R, just the fact that you can't really miss it. You have stuff like Leona, who can engage through minions, who has very low cooldowns, and it's just going to have more CC than Thresh does most of the time. So it's like, in extreme cases, there will probably be better champions, but for just all around, if you're really strong on him, then he works. Now, if he does hit his hook is actually on a really, really low cooldown, right? It can get down to 12 seconds, but if you land it, I believe it lowers the cooldown by 3 seconds. So, if you get it to 12, you get like maybe 25 cooldown reduction off of him, 25% cooldown reduction, and that's going to take it down to like 8 seconds, and you get a 3-second refund. So it's like a 5-second cooldown on that hook in a realistic scenario in kind of the mid-game, as long as you're landing it. So he's very good. You get rewarded if you're using his abilities correctly, but you can also get pretty hard punished if you don't. So anyways, pretty strong champ. Tom Kench is another one who's been coming up. He's getting played like in pro more often. What is his win rate? Let me see. I know it was pretty good for a while there, but I think it did kind of start to fall off. And I haven't played as or against Tom Kench a ton since his recent buffs, so I really don't have a great first-hand account of him. But just watching him and here, okay, he's down to like a 49% win rate, so he is getting picked. But yeah, his win rate has definitely moderated, so he was up in like the 60%, but he's back down to 49, so, he's okay. But of the majors there, right, like Leona's got a low win rate, but most of these other champs, did Karma really fall off? No, she's there, okay, she's at 54. But, it's lower than a lot of these other champs, so the way I've heard it described is he's kind of all in on the early game. Doublelift called him like a Pantheon support, in the sense that you need to play for hyper aggression and just snowballing early. And I think he does have the tools for that. His Q does quite a bit of damage, has a big slow early, and if you land your Q, it pretty much guarantees you're going to land your W unless they have a dash or a flash. So you just like land your Q, W, auto attack, and then your Q will be up again for the stun, and then they're probably dead if you get to that point. So he's really good at sort of brawling against other melee champs early, but then late game he doesn't do that much. Like, you can save one person per fight, I guess, kind of like a Zillion ult with your ultimate, but then you just don't have a lot of other guaranteed power. You do get a lot of tankiness. Your auto attacks do okay damage. Your tongue lash is like okay damage, late game. But, I've just heard that you can kind of get outdone just because a lot of it's not guaranteed. And it's just not a lot of CC. It's all very conditional. So compared to something like the Nautilus, where you just press R and they can just win a team fight because it just CCs the entire team, or Thresh with all the stuff he can do, or Rakan with his healing and shielding and engage and all that stuff. He's okay. So if you have like specifically Jinx or some other hyper carry on the back line, and you just need like unconditional, I'm going to peel this person, then Tom Kench can be good. Now again, Renata can also help you in that situation, or you can do Zillion, can also help you in that type of situation. But they're all going to have different strengths and weaknesses, so he's okay. I do want him to come back. I really like his voice lines. I like kind of his vibe, the top hat, southern gentleman, catfish kind of thing. I played Tom Kench a ton in Season 7, back when he was like Turbo OP. But I'm not fully confident that you want to have him like super high on a tier list that's targeted towards silver to platinum people. But there are certain matchups where he can be good. And that's pretty much going to be it. The last couple I'll talk about, Zyra and Brand, really good at pressuring lane. Great if you have the Jhin or the Caitlyn or the Jinx, and you just really want to, push him in a tower and try to kill him. Then I think all of those champs can be good. They do fall behind later if they don't get a lot of kills because their items are very expensive. It's very easy to flank and spank them. They don't have a lot of mobility. They are squishy. It's very hard for them to keep vision because you can get engaged on and killed. Zyra is a little bit better at that just because the plants can give you some vision. But vision control is tough. Pyke, he can be okay. They have buffed some of the AD items in recent times, most notably Umbral Glaive. So, he can be alright if you snowball with him. Zillion, really good at stopping people from getting assassinated. Also puts out a lot of mobility. His landing phase can be kind of iffy if you're not consistently landing double bombs, but he does scale pretty well, especially against dive comps. When you're not against enchanters, then he is going to be pretty good. Morgana, good against hard engaged champs like your Leona, your Nautilus, your Rakan to some extent, but you basically only have 2 abilities with your Q and your E. The rest is a little lackluster. Seraphine did get some buffs on this patch, but I don't think it was quite enough. I could be wrong about that. I do want to keep this under an hour, so I don't want to spend a ton of time here. Yeah, the win rate's still not that great, but I'll just have to play her and test it out more. But anyways, that's going to be it. Thank you very much. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Have a good day.